Sometimes the people we overlook carry the power to change everything. Grace Bennett, an overweight single mother and former Army nurse, spends her nights scrubbing the marble floors of Chicago's most elite restaurant, ignored, invisible, forgotten. But one ordinary evening, she notices something every doctor has missed: a young billionaire's son showing silent signs of a deadly illness. In that moment, Grace must risk her job, her pride, and everything she's built to follow her instincts and save a stranger's child. This is a story about courage that doesn't wear a uniform, compassion that defies judgment, and a mother's unbreakable heart. Stay until the end. You'll remember why kindness still changes the world. The chandeliers at Asteria didn't really light the room so much as persuade it to glow. Crystal teardrops cast constellations across honeyed wood and glass. A piano whispered standards somewhere behind a living wall of orchids. The waiters moved like fish through a private sea, silver trays balanced, conversation effortless, smiles precise. The city pressed its forehead to the floor-to-ceiling windows, Chicago in sequins, the river a black silk ribbon beyond the 42nd floor. Grace Bennett mopped where the light never bothered to look. Her navy work shirt pulled against the curve of her shoulders as she angled the mop head beneath a brass console table. People said a lot of things about Grace: that she took up space, that the uniform did her no favors, that the freight elevator groaned louder when she stepped in. People had said a lot worse back when she wore camouflage and body armor and kept other people's hearts beating on a desert tarmac. The opinions had changed shape, that was all. "Night, Sergeant," Luis from Dish Pit teased whenever he passed. He was 20 and built like a tuning fork, always vibrating with good intentions. "You good?" "Always, Private," she'd reply, and he'd grin because the banter made the work bearable. Grace didn't correct him. She hadn't been a sergeant. She'd been a staff nurse attached to a dust-off unit, the kind who could find a vein by feel in a blackout and talk a man back from shock with nothing but her voice. She still carried the habit of scanning a room the way soldiers do: exits noted, hazards catalogued, pulse of the space logged without thinking. She also carried the cost. A single mother now, an honorable discharge folded inside a shoebox. A son who needed a roof that didn't leak, and medication that wasn't cheap. Caleb asked the same thing every night when she kissed him at Mrs. Ortega's apartment before clock-in. "How much do you love me, Mom?" "More than the skyline, baby. More than every light in it." He had her eyes and his father's stubborn streak. He also had asthma that flared when winter rasped at the city, and a courage that astonished her. Grace worked nights because days belonged to him. The school drop-off, the library trips, the inhaler checks, the algebra that made her sweat until he laughed and taught her how to factor. At 8:47 p.m., the private elevator purred open, and money stepped out as if it owned the moon. A woman in a backless black gown, hair as sleek as lacquer, moved through the hostess's smile like a blade through ribbon. Elena Park. Even on floors where nobody admitted being impressed, people were impressed by Elena. Venture queen. The kind of founder whose keynote made streaming platforms crash. The kind of buyer who didn't ask for the chef, but instructed the manager to send him my compliments in a tone that folded the entire evening into its pocket. At her side, a boy in a charcoal suit tried to look invisible. Grace noticed first what the lights couldn't: the way his jacket sat wrong because he was guarding his right lower abdomen, the way his steps shortened as if each one asked permission from pain, the glassiness under the good posture. His cheeks lacked the polite bloom dinners like this could fake with dessert. What sat there instead was the dull, waxy pallor she'd learned to fear on landing zones. "Elena Park," the manager cooed, guiding them toward the private alcove. "So glad you could join us. The tasting menu." The boy swallowed. Nothing dramatic, nothing anyone had to notice. But the swallow hitched, and a breath after it was shallow, and his free hand trembled the way a trapped bird does when it wants badly not to betray itself. Grace's fingers tightened around the mop handle, then loosened with practice. She counted. 1, 2, shallow inhale. 3, guarding reflex. 4, hand drifts again to the same quadrant like a compass needle. Right lower quadrant. Nausea in the knit of his mouth. A sheen that wasn't heat so much as the body turning inward. She could hear her old preceptor's voice the way some people hear hymns. "You don't need a CT to see a house on fire, Bennett. You need to smell smoke and believe your nose." Behind the velvet curtain, the room became soft focus luxury. Orchids and blown glass, and a view that made people take out their phones. Grace stayed in the corridor and laid the mop across the bucket. Her heart knocked once, hard, in her chest. She had promised herself she would keep her head down. She needed this job. Rent didn't care that she'd pulled people from burning Humvees. Insurers didn't care that she could parse a cardiac rhythm like a language. The rules of the new war were simple. Keep your badge, keep your head down, keep your kids safe. The boy's door opened a crack. Elena slipped out, voice low and honed with that strange alloy only very powerful people and very scared parents share. "I don't care that he's between practices, Michael. I want labs in the morning, not next week." "Yes, I heard Dr. Huang." "No, I'm not reassured." She ended the call and leaned infinitesimally against the wall, eyes closed. The gown made her look invulnerable. The set of her mouth told another story. Grace did not move closer. She made her voice the thing people had always done what she asked for. "Ma'am," she said softly, the syllable shaped like a courtesy and a lifeline. "I'm sorry. I don't want to intrude. I'm on sanitation crew. But if your son's pain is low on the right, and he's queasy and keeps guarding it, waiting could be dangerous." Elena's eyes opened. Blue the way ice is blue, because the cold had to be deep before it could be that clear. She took in the uniform, the badge, the body under both. She took in the mop bucket, and the dull shine of the corridor, and the fact that everyone else in Elena's life asked permission to speak. Grace had chosen to risk it. "What are you?" Elena asked. Not unkindly, but in the way one would ask a puzzle for its explanation. "A doctor?" "Former army nurse," Grace said. "Now I keep other people's magic from showing its seams." She pulled her shoulders back just enough to feel the old posture return, the one that said, "I know what I know, and I will own it even if it costs me." I'm not diagnosing him in a hallway. I am saying I've seen this story start this way, and the next chapter can get very bad very fast. A beat lengthened, then snapped. From inside the alcove, the boy, Leo, let out a small, involuntary sound, half gasp and half vow not to make any sound at all. It was the kind that made a mother's face change shape. Elena didn't ask for the manager or the sommelier or the chef, whose truffles were rumored to make hardened investors cry. She looked at Grace. The corridor smelled faintly of eucalyptus and lemon, the way money likes its effort scented. Somewhere, cutlery sang a note like a thin piece of silver. Outside, the river kept its own counsel. What should I do? Elena asked, and the question disarmed the room. Let me ask him 3 questions and press in one place, Maman, Grace said, keeping her voice level. If I'm wrong, I'll apologize and disappear. If I'm not, we don't wait. Elena hesitated, the kind of pause that had bankrupted competitors. Then she stepped aside and opened the door wide enough for Grace to pass. Grace set the mop handle gently across the bucket, rubbed sanitizer into her palms until they stung like resolve, and crossed the threshold into the light. The private alcove at Asteria looked like a postcard that had learned to breathe. Orchids, glossy as wet leaves, glassware arranged with military precision, the city star glow spreading beneath the windows like a promise no one else could keep. Leo sat angled on his chair, his jacket tugged off one shoulder, a linen napkin clenched in his left hand. Up close, Grace saw what the light had softened. The micro-tremor at the corner of his mouth, the shallow rise of his chest, the way his pupils didn't quite commit to the room. He was trying so hard to be fine it hurt to watch. Grace crouched so her eyes met his at a level the world rarely offers children. Hey, Leo, I'm Grace. I used to be an army nurse. Can I ask you a couple of questions? He looked at his mother. Elena gave a single nod. The steel in it had changed temperature, no longer boardroom cold, but forged for him. Where does it hurt the most? Grace asked. Leo touched his lower right abdomen with careful fingers, as though the skin were thin glass. Here. It's worse today. Feel sick to your stomach? He swallowed. Yeah. Water makes it weird. Fevers? Like a little, Elena answered, voice controlled to the point of shaking. Last night, 99.9. He felt warmer an hour ago. Bathroom okay? Grace's tone stayed gentle, clinical without being distant. Leo's gaze slid away. Not really. Since when? A couple days, he murmured. Grace nodded once, the kind of nod that says a puzzle just found its cornerstone. She held up her hands. I'm going to press on your belly very gently. Tell me exactly when it hurts. You're not being dramatic. You're giving me data. Ready? He nodded, jaw set like a promise. Grace palpated the left side first, soft, guarded only by caution, then above the navel. She moved in slow arcs, a map she'd traced 1,000 times under headlamp glare and desert grit. When her fingers traveled 2/3 from his umbilicus to his right iliac crest, the old McBurney roadmap, the muscles twitched under her touch, a reflexive wall. Leo gasped, then bit the sound in half. I know, Grace said, steady as a metronome. She pressed a breath deeper, then released. Leo's reaction wasn't a cry so much as an involuntary truth. His face crumpling, a soft sound escaping like a bird that had flown against glass. Rebound, Grace said quietly, to herself, to the memory of everyone she'd ever learned from. She watched his breathing, counted again. The sheen on his forehead had a new insistence. Beneath the crisp cotton of his shirt, the small engine of a boy's body labored against the wrong kind of fire. Elena had not moved. Is it? She didn't finish. It behaves like appendicitis, Grace said, plain and unflinching. And it's not early. If that appendix ruptures, infection floods the abdomen and the game changes fast. We go now. Dr. Huang examined him on Wednesday, Elena said, as if grasping at a rope she respected even while it burned. He said virus. Wednesday might have been vague, Grace replied. Tonight isn't. We're outside the margin where waiting is safe. The door eased open and Dana, the manager in an impeccable suit that still smelled faintly of coffee, appeared with polished concern. Her gaze flicked from Grace's uniform to Elena's gown, to Leo's posture. "Is everything all? We need an ambulance now," Elena said, the words sharp enough to cut silk. "Use the service entrance and clear the elevator." Dana blinked, recalibrated, and vanished like a professional should. Grace rose, sanitizer biting her palms again. She considered the skyline, the floor number, the time. "Traffic's a mess at this hour," she said. "Call 911, yes. But I'm also calling ahead so they prep an OR. St. Matthew's Medical Center, pediatric surgery. I know who's on tonight." "You have admitting privileges?" Elena asked. It wasn't doubt. It was logistics. "I have a number," Grace said, and dialed. The voice that answered put 10 years of noise between now and then. "Maya, it's Bennett." "Bennett?" The ER charge nurse sounded like adrenaline, and relief had just shaken hands. "Tell me you're not in a helicopter." "Penthouse restaurant, 10-year-old male, RLQ pain, progressive over a week, febrile tonight, nausea, constipation, guarding, rebound at McBurney's, concern for impending perforation." "Copy. I'll ping Ped's surgery and bay a room. Name?" Elena's mouth opened. Grace held up a hand. "We'll do paperwork on arrival," she told Maya. "We're moving." By the time Grace ended the call, the world had rearranged itself into corridors of purpose. Security cleared a path. The piano stopped being a song and became a metronome. Diners looked up with faces that practiced concern without practice. At the elevator, a guard offered a wheelchair. Leo refused with a brave, useless shake. Grace guided him into it anyway, voice a low cadence that made refusal feel like relief. Inside the elevator, the mirror gave everyone back a version of themselves the situation didn't need. Grace broad-shouldered in a uniform that strangers used as shorthand for a joke. Elena statuesque and stripped of all disguises except the most human one. A boy trying to be the kind of man he thought the adults needed. The car hummed. Floor numbers blinked backward. "Am I going to die?" Leo asked, quiet and blunt, the way children cut to the part that matters. "No," Grace said, with the kind of certainty that isn't performance. "Not on my watch, and not on the surgeons. You did the bravest thing. You told the truth about your pain." He stared at her, held by something that had nothing to do with titles. "Are you scared?" "Always," Grace said. "In the field, in cities, as a mom. Courage isn't no fear. It's walking the next step with it." Elena watched her, 1,000 press clippings collapsing into one real angle of a person. "People don't usually talk to me like this," she said, a wryness tugging at the corner of a mouth that wanted to cry. "They ask what I want. You told me what my son needs." "Needs outrank wants," Grace said, and the doors opened. The ambulance squatted under the awning, like a promise with lights. The crew took one look at Grace's stance and switched to the shorthand of people who have done hard things together. 10-year-old male, acute abdomen, RLQ tenderness, rebound positive, Grace rattled, already lifting Leo with the practiced choreography of preserving dignity and speed. Vitals cuff hissed. Pulse ox blinked. Straps kissed into place. "Family?" a medic asked. "Mother on board," Elena said, already climbing. She looked at Grace, at the uniform, that had become a target so many times. At the body, so many dismissed as evidence instead of context. At the woman who had cut through a room designed to ignore her. "You're coming." Grace's supervisor would not love this. Her paycheck might not survive it. The rent would come anyway, like winter. She thought of Caleb's nightly question, of albuterol hisses and spelling lists, and the way his hand felt small and sure inside hers. "I'm coming," she said, and hauled herself in as the doors slammed and the city peeled away into sirens and resolve. "Ma'am," the driver called back. "Which hospital?" "St. Matthew's," Grace answered. "They're ready." The rig lunged into the street. Elena gripped Leo's hand with one of hers, and after a breath that sounded like surrender and gratitude at once, reached for Grace with the other. "Thank you," she managed. "Don't thank me yet," Grace said, eyes on the monitor, mind already 2 turns ahead. "Save it for the moment he asks for pancakes." The ambulance tore through the wet Chicago night, sirens painting the windows in frantic red and blue. Inside, the air was thick with antiseptic, fear, and something stronger, determination. Grace sat beside the stretcher, her knees braced, her hand steady on Leo's wrist, as she counted pulses she didn't trust to the monitor to keep right. Elena held her son's hand with both of hers. The woman who once commanded boardrooms into silence now whispered the same words over and over, as if they were prayer beads. "Hold on, baby. Just hold on." Grace watched Leo's face. The pallor had deepened, sweat gathering along his hairline. The faint tremor in his abdomen told her the inflammation was spreading faster than time would allow. "How far out?" she asked the paramedic. 6 minutes tops, he said, not looking away from the road ahead. "St. Matthew's is standing by. They've cleared the trauma bay." Grace nodded, but her mind was elsewhere. It was in the desert, 7 years earlier. An open-air triage tent. The smell of diesel and blood and dust. A young corporal clutching his side, whispering, "I'm fine," right before his appendix burst. She remembered the helplessness, the seconds that slipped through her hands like dry sand. Not tonight. Not this boy. Leo's eyes fluttered open. "Miss Grace," he whispered, his voice a ghost against the siren. "It hurts to breathe." "I know," she said softly. "That means we're right on time. You just stay with me, okay?" He nodded faintly, trying to smile, and for a moment, Grace saw Caleb, her son, small and brave in hospital light, asking her if he was going to die. She blinked hard. Not now. Emotion was a luxury she couldn't afford inside an ambulance. When they burst through the hospital's emergency doors, a team was already waiting. The gurney rolled forward in one smooth motion, doctors and nurses speaking in the clipped poetry of medicine. 10-year-old male, suspected perforated appendicitis. IV access right arm, vitals dropping. Call surgery. Notify Patel. Grace kept pace until the doors marked surgical, restricted closed between her and Leo. Then silence fell, thick, sterile, final. Elena turned to her, trembling, mascara running down the edges of her mask-like composure. "Is he going to make it?" Grace met her eyes. "He's in the right hands now. You got him here in time." Elena sat down hard in the waiting chair, her designer heels clattering against the linoleum. Her hands, always perfect in every photo, now trembled like leaves. Grace sat beside her without asking. Sometimes what people need most isn't a speech. It's company in the silence. Minutes passed in uneven stretches. Grace's watch said 37 minutes had gone by, but her body felt every second. She wanted to call home, to tell Caleb she was safe, to hear his little voice, but her phone had died somewhere between the hallway and the siren. Elena finally broke the quiet. "You knew it wasn't just a stomachache. How?" Grace rubbed her palms together, the scent of sanitizer clinging to the skin. "You start noticing patterns after a while. The way someone breathes, how their eyes move when they lie about pain. I used to work trauma in the army. Out there, waiting to be sure could mean losing someone." Elena nodded slowly. "I spent 2 weeks listening to a doctor tell me I was overreacting. I wanted to believe him. Maybe because it's easier to think the experts are right." Grace gave a small smile. "Believing the best doesn't make you foolish. It makes you human. But your gut told you something was wrong, didn't it?" Elena's lip quivered. "It did. And I ignored it. Because I thought, mothers like me don't know better." "Mothers like you," Grace said quietly, "move mountains when they finally decide to listen to themselves." The automatic doors hissed open, and a woman in blue scrubs stepped out. Dr. Patel, pediatric surgeon, exhaustion written into the corners of her smile. Elena leapt to her feet. "Mrs. Park?" Yes, that's me." "The appendix was badly inflamed," Dr. Patel said gently. "It hadn't ruptured yet, but it was very close. We removed it just in time. Your son is stable and recovering in post-op. You can see him in a few minutes." Elena's breath came out in a sob that sounded like release. She pressed a hand over her mouth, and tears slipped free, unpolished and real. Grace looked down at her hands and exhaled, only realizing now that she'd been holding her breath for an hour. When Dr. Patel left, Elena turned and hugged her, the kind of embrace that doesn't ask for permission. "You saved him," she said, voice breaking. "You, someone nobody in that restaurant even looked at, saved my son." Grace hesitated, then returned the hug, steady and solid. "I just paid attention," she said. "That's all it takes sometimes." Elena pulled back, eyes bright with something new. Humility, maybe gratitude, maybe both. "What do you do when you're not saving other people's kids?" "Clean floors," Grace said simply. "Make sure the city shines for folks who don't notice who polishes it. And raise my own boy. That's enough." Elena shook her head, disbelieving. "No, it's not enough for the world to waste people like you," Grace chuckled softly. "World's been wasting people like me for a long time. I just stopped waiting for its permission to matter." Elena smiled through tears. "When this is over, I'd like to change that. For both of us." Grace didn't know what that meant, but for the first time in years, she allowed herself to feel something dangerous. Hope. A nurse waved them toward the recovery ward. Behind the curtain, Leo stirred on the bed, pale but breathing steady, his small hand reaching instinctively toward his mother. Elena clasped it, sobbing quietly. Grace stood by the doorway, unseen again, just how she preferred. And as the monitors hummed and the night softened around them, she whispered to herself, "More than all the lights in the city, Caleb. Always more." Outside, dawn began to bloom, a soft, patient light that didn't care about status or suits or scars. It only cared about who had chosen to keep someone else alive through the dark. Morning came slow and golden, the kind of light that doesn't announce itself but seeps gently into the corners, softening even the sterile edges of a hospital corridor. Grace leaned against the vending machine, sipping bitter coffee that had long ago stopped pretending to taste good. She had worked through too many nights like this, the kind that left your bones humming and your heart oddly full. Down the hall, she could hear Elena's laughter, fragile but alive. Inside the recovery room, Leo sat propped up against a mountain of white pillows, eyes clearer, color returning. He was pale but breathing steady, with a child's resilience already patching him together faster than medicine could. When Grace entered, he grinned weakly. "Miss Grace, I didn't die." She chuckled. "Good. I would have been really annoyed if you tried." Elena turned toward her, tired and radiant, her hair a little undone, her power heels traded for hospital slippers. "They said he'll make a full recovery," she said, her voice still trembling with disbelief. "A few hours more and—" She stopped, shaking her head, unable to finish. Grace nodded. "You did what mattered most. You listened when it counted." For a moment, silence filled the room, the kind of silence that carries weight, not emptiness. Then Elena said quietly, "You saved his life. I can never repay you." Grace waved a hand. "Don't need repayment. I've had enough miracles to know they don't keep receipts." But Elena didn't smile. She reached into her handbag and pulled out a slim folder, the logo of Horizon Global Technologies embossed in gold. "I mean this, Grace. You're wasting your gift mopping floors. I run a corporate medical division, on-site clinics for our employees. We need someone like you. 9 to 5, full benefits, double what you make now, and full coverage for your son's care." Grace blinked. Ma'am, I can't." Elena's voice softened. "You can. You should. People like you are what medicine needs. Not just degrees, heart, instinct, humanity." Grace's throat tightened. She thought of Caleb, of rent notices, of the inhaler that always seemed to run out before the end of the month. She thought of all the nights she had prayed not for wealth but for time. And for the first time in years, someone was offering it. "Let me think about it," she whispered. "Think fast," Elena said gently, smiling now, "because I won't take no for an answer." 2 months later, the snow had begun to melt along Chicago's curbs, turning the city silver under the afternoon sun. Grace sat behind a tidy desk at the Horizon Wellness Center, wearing a white coat for the first time in almost a decade. Her nameplate, Grace Bennett, RN, gleamed softly under the lamp. Across from her sat a nervous intern with a scraped knuckle, and Grace patched him up while telling him stories about dust storms and army chow. Every so often, she'd glance at the photo on her desk. Caleb and Leo, arms slung around each other, faces sticky with ice cream. Elena had kept her promise. The two families had grown strangely close. Grace and Caleb were now regular guests at the Park household, though household was too small a word for a skyline penthouse. But it wasn't the glass or the view that mattered. It was watching Leo and Caleb build Lego cities on a carpet where money and struggle didn't exist, only laughter. Elena had changed too. The once unreachable business titan now took evenings off, cooked burnt pancakes, and showed up for school plays with her phone switched off. She had launched the Bennett Foundation, a scholarship fund for single parents pursuing medical training. In every interview, she credited a woman who reminded me what paying attention really means. Sometimes Grace would still hear whispers from people who judged her, comments about her weight, about how she didn't look like someone who saved lives. She had stopped caring, because she knew what those people didn't. That real strength had nothing to do with size or salary. It was in the quiet courage to keep showing up. One afternoon, as she was finishing her shift, a small knock came at her office door. Caleb peeked in, holding a drawing. "Mom, I made this for you." She smiled and pulled him close. On the paper, in bright crayon, he had drawn her in a nurse's coat, with a golden heart on her chest and the words, "My hero," scribbled in big, uneven letters. Grace laughed softly, tears stinging her eyes. "You know," she said, "I used to think I gave up everything when I left the army. But turns out, I was just getting ready for the most important mission of all." Caleb grinned. "Being my mom?" "Exactly that, soldier." That evening, as the city lit up outside her window, Grace stood for a long while watching the reflections ripple in the glass. In the glow, she saw herself, the woman who once hid in shadows, now standing, tall, unashamed of her shape or her scars. A mother who had traded medals for bedtime stories, rank for love, and in doing so, had found something even the brightest skyline couldn't outshine. When the phone rang, she answered with a smile. It was Elena, inviting them over for dinner. Grace looked at Caleb, who was already grabbing his coat. As they stepped into the fading sunlight, Grace whispered, "More than all the lights in the city, baby. Always more." And somewhere, in the hush between two heartbeats, she realized that sometimes, just sometimes, the ones the world overlooks end up saving it, one act of attention at a time.